I want to give you a sense of what do we mean when we talk about systems thinking, or what do I mean perhaps when I talk about systems thinking, and how is it useful? How do we actually use it to enable ourselves to align from the level of the individual all the way up to a group as a whole? Because if we don't align from the individual level up, we're going to come apart when we begin to hit tough issues going forward. So I'm going to place a bit of a contextual frame around why this became so critical for me and for my clients. I'm preaching to the choir here, so I'll do it quickly. It's like we have increasing population. I'm not closer to the mic.
Yeah. It's the mic.
How's that?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Holler out if I mess something else up, okay? So we've got increasing population, increasing interdependence. We have increasing demands for quality of life, of course, because of the disparity and inequity in our global culture. And we have these decreasing buffers of water and soil, topsoil, and things like that. And we have these emerging, but more importantly, I think, converging issues. We've not had in our history very often the times when one issue collides with another issue. We may have had an epidemic, or we may have had an economic crisis, but to have an energy crisis and an economic crisis, or an energy crisis and a pandemic converge takes us into a whole different kind of a world. So what's beginning to happen now is we're beginning to see this emergence of complex multi-stakeholder problems, and those are the characteristics they share. They're complex. That is, if any one of us had the resources or the authority required to solve them, it would be tough to figure out how to resolve the financial situation, or how to resolve our energy problem, or climate change. It wouldn't be straightforward. And we have, and they typically require that stakeholders that never worked together before collaborate in order to solve these problems, sometimes oppositional stakeholders. So our traditional ability to solve them looks like that bottom black line. So for me, our bigger problem has been, how do we solve problems emerging at that rate? What I have discovered, though, is this delightful opportunity in all of this, that we have the opportunity to create relationship with one another and with reality. And that, for me, is the cornerstone of the work, is what's reality. Not an ideology, not a wish list, but what's physical reality. And it is knowable. And create relationship and clarity with reality and with one another through inclusion and collaboration, both on behalf of the individual. What are we seeking to achieve in good faith as individuals, but on behalf of the whole? Because in the groups I've worked with, we have so much more in common than we do in terms of differences. And then how do we bring about resilience and equity? Because that's really the only thing that's going to work long term. So in my mind, that's the opportunity here, is that the only way out of this is through it, by solving these problems to bring about resilience and equity socially, ecologically, economically, and politically. So here, if there was only one thing that I would ask people to take away from thinking about this, when I talk with clients, I don't think I ever use the word systems thinking. I simply say, we've got to get clear about 4 fundamental things if we're going to be able to accomplish anything in our work together. Number one, what's the state of reality? Like, what's physically going on in the real world? What's going on today, and what do we want to see happen in the future? If we don't agree about the physical reality, we will never get any further in our conversation. Look at climate change. It's getting hotter. No, it's getting colder. It's permanent. No, it's temporary. Until a critical mass of us got clear about that, we could go no further in our conversation. Once we're clear about that, though, then we can begin to step down to the next level, which is, okay, so what's the structure that's causing that reality? Because we have caused our reality. We cause our reality on a daily basis. And then when we're clear about the structure that causes reality, which finally, in the climate change arena, enough of us got clear that it's man-made, okay? So we got clear about the structure causing that, the burning of fossil fuels and some other things. Once we're clear about that level, then we can ask ourselves the question, okay, if that's the structure that's causing today's reality, where do we intervene in this causal structure to change that reality, to bring about the reality we seek? And once that's clear, then we can go to where most people start. I think as Gar talked about it, he's concerned about people jumping to projects too quickly, okay? Most of the groups I've come in to work with, whether it's Apple or HP or Lockheed, or whether it's REAMP or Roots of Change or the Hawaii Governor's Office of Early Learning and Education, they're starting at the structural, they're starting to try to make the changes before they even understand the system as a whole. But it's only when we have this level of agreement from the individual level through to the whole that when we step into how do we actually make those structural changes that will bring about the behavioral changes we're seeking, then we can move smoothly into that next set of steps. So I'll give you a couple of quick specific examples. How am I doing on time, Nikki? Where am I? Oh, great. So I'm going to show you something from REAMP to give you a sense of the promise of systems thinking, from Roots of Change, and then from On the Commons around the Global Water Challenge. So, sorry, let me back up. Boop. So this was the final redacted map from, sorry, reduced map, it wasn't redacted, reduced map from the REAMP work, which Jenny Curtis helped initiate along with Rick Reed from the Garfield Foundation. This was the extract after an analysis of a map that had about 160 different parts and pieces on it, all tied together in a systems map, one of which you'll see later on. But it gave us the high-level understanding of how the strategy needed to unfold. It became really clear, and I know this seems like a duh, but until we had it mapped out, we couldn't come to agreement about, well, where do we act? But once we got it all mapped out and analyzed it, it became very, very clear that we have to work on these 4 bins if we're to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2030. We have to focus on energy efficiency, the demand for clean, we have to reduce the demand for do dirty, and we have to retire existing dirty. And what became clear through this as well was the strategy. We couldn't go out and shut down an existing dirty power plant immediately. If we did in 2004, we would have prompted the building of a new dirty power plant because there were no policies in place. The technologies weren't in place. It wasn't yet cost effective to go solar. And energy efficiency wasn't yet mandated at state institutional levels and in other places. We didn't have the suppliers. We didn't have the supplies to do those things. So if we'd gone out and said, well, let's just immediately start reducing greenhouse gases by shutting down a power plant, we would have caused the emergence of a new dirty power plant with a useful life of probably 80 years. We would have inadvertently made our problem worse, not better. So REAMP spent its early years getting policies in place very successfully in 8 Midwestern states to boost energy efficiency and to boost demand for clean energy. And now they're in a position to be able to pull the trigger on existing dirty plants. So that's the kind of insight we got about that. We got insight about where and how to do that as well. This is from Roots of Change around sustainable food and agriculture, where we worked with Secretary of Agriculture for the state of California, the president of Whole Foods, members of the AFL-CIO, people working in the obesity movement and other places. What became interesting here was you begin, these things that are in squares like that were the leverage points that we identified. This too was an extract out of a much larger map of about 200 variables. We were able to use these extracted intervention points at a gathering of about 160 activists at Roots of Change's summit in LA to organize themselves around these leverage points, to gather around them, to share with each other what were they trying to cause and what's required for them to cause that. And once that was clear, then to begin to make requests upstream about what they needed from others in the system in order to do their work, because they weren't all experts in everything, and then to make offers downstream about what they were willing to supply downstream in the system. So it created a value exchange network across what was previously not a non-collaborative, but they weren't actively coordinating together, but so it allowed them to coordinate relative to specific outcomes based on the systems map. And on the commons, this was really fascinating. This particular individual map here, people have been talking about privatization as being the threat. And as we went through the process of interviewing and mapping, we suddenly realized, wait a minute, it's not privatization. It's an anti-democratic movement. It blocks transparency. It tries to appeal to the benefit of the few rather than the many through bribes and those kinds of things. It doesn't announce itself so that people can't gather and make collaborative decisions. So calling it privatization just sort of mislabels it and causes more misunderstanding. When you realize it's really about an anti-democratic movement, that's what it is at its heart, suddenly you can develop completely different strategies and you awaken the population to a completely novel and in some ways, unfortunately, inspiring threat. Here's the second thing I'd want people to remember. We have to build this relationship and clarity from the level of each of you as an individual up. If we don't know what you need, if we don't know what you believe is important, if we don't know how you think based on your own valid experience working in these arenas, number one, we'll lose so much, but I'm afraid more importantly, we'll lose you. if you're not somehow baked into the process, if those affected aren't somehow baked into the process, we're going to get to a point where we will lose them, and then we'll lose the power that we have as a collaborative, engaged people. Once we're clear at the individual level and in relationship there, then we can begin to move up to the level of the subgroup. And that is, so what is it you care most about? In REAMP, for example, it were those that cared about local economic development was their primary focus. Others, it was environment. Others just loved policy, and they wanted to solve on the policy level. And then there were others that cared about safe, reliable, economical energy. And they first gathered at that level, and once they got clear again and built relationship again at that level, then they were able to move to the level of the group as a whole, where an environmentalist could have a very clear relationship-based conversation with a utility, someone from the utility sector. Okay? So building in this way is critical to our success. And then to be able to do that whole thing at scale. How am I on time? 7 minutes. Thank you. So again, some specific examples. By the way, I'm happy to post this deck for anybody that wants it. Okay? There's nothing on here that's proprietary, I don't think. You can't quite see that. This was Angela Blackwell at PolicyLink when we mapped her for a project called Climate Bay Area around AB 32 and SB 375 around GHG reductions and sustainable community strategy. What was critical here was the very genesis of her work is understanding the vital role of place and understanding the vital role of participation. And her internalized sense of that was an incredible gift to the whole project. Her stories about that, her principled understanding, her ability to distill it down into really clear, actionable processes was critical to our ability to be successful. This again was from REAMP. This was at the subgroup level where they came together and agreed that what they cared about after about an hour-and-a-half conversation among about 8 or 10 environmentalists was the potential for a stable climate. They knew back in 2004 that we were headed for what they called a cliff, and the question was, were we going to have a ledge to land on when we got there? And so they charted the progress of that over time to get a sense collectively of what was causing that goal to be degraded over time. This built relationship, it caused an exchange of understanding and information, much like we want you all to be able to do later today. And then they were able to see the gap, this gap that they had to somehow respond to. A huge gap. And that brought up a boost of energy in the room itself that was palpable. There was an energetic shift in the room and a completely different level of commitment to solving that problem because they were solving for a goal that all of them cared about. This one you can't read at all at that level. This was global water again, but here is this understanding of that the role that privatization and misinformation plays in confusing the understanding of the reality of sustainable water. And this is part of a much larger map in which that's explained. But it helped them get the insight on like where do they really need to focus to help block the confusion and help create more understanding about reality. So applied to resilience. My belief is, and my experience is, we need to collectively become clear about the state of reality and come into relationship with one another about that and in relationship with reality itself. Human beings are uniquely designed to respond to reality. We're one of the most sensitive beings on the planet. And when we buffer ourselves from reality, we limit our human creativity. We limit our ability to respond. So though it may be harsh, getting into tight relationship with reality, my reality, your reality, coming to understand that and internalize that and sense that is critical to our ability to respond. From there, then, rigorously understanding the structure of reality. How does this thing work? There is a cause to this, and it can be mapped out. From there, where to intervene, and then we can talk about how do we make the change. As individuals, subgroups, whole group, and at scale. How am I doing, 5 minutes? Thanks, I think we're good. All right, so what have we done so far? We've done, as Kenny said, 16 interviews, we've done individual maps, and we've created a sketch. Now, I want to be really clear here. We wouldn't be so arrogant as to say, okay, and here's the map. Now, y'all get to work. We deliberately want to be able to create an example of what would a map of what it would take to create a resilient communities network look like. And that's a very broad set of, Jenny's shaking her head, she's very aware, but it's a very broad set of parts and pieces and needs to be able to solve for the whole. So we did individual interviews with a range of people who I won't name all of them now because we've only got 4 minutes probably. All right. But they were people who really had on-the-ground experience with what it takes to do some part of a resilient community's efforts. And for each of them, we created a map as best we could of their mental model. So in Tom Lindsay's case, for example, with Envision Spokane, things that were really clear about the significance, the importance, the need to assert our human rights and nature's rights. Because the Constitution is designed for commerce. It's not designed for people and planet. It's illegal for us to do many of the things we want to do at the local level. Something Gar Alperovitz talks about. That we've got to confront this beast, okay? And we've got to have that hard conversation. And we have to challenge the rights of corporations. And I won't speak for Tom, but it sounds like he baits corporations. He wants to call out the fight so people can become aware of what's really going on. Get the wizard out from behind the curtain. This is the map we're going to look at later today. I don't want to blind you, so I'll change the screen real quick. But there's some really seminal, important understandings that arise out of it that I'll talk about later today, but I want to give you just an example because Peter Walshaw's work is really critical to this. Janine Binyas's work is really critical to this. Tom Goldtooth's work is really critical to this. This internalized, felt sense of appreciation and humility about the value of nature, the value of life, and our responsibility to it. So this ability to internalize that, to use that to help understand and appreciate nature, you're going to see when we look at the map later on, is at the heart of our ability to succeed socially, to succeed economically, politically, and to be able to build the movement required to bring this change about. So there'll be some subgroups we'll talk about later on, but in our case, the subgroups broke out primarily as ecology, society, economy, politics, and movement building. And I was surprised. I thought they'd break out like energy and food systems and water and transportation. And yeah, those are all in there and they're all important, but the change needs to happen at a much larger level. And I'm ashamed to say, I didn't get that until I interviewed all these people and stuck it all together. Today, we're going to do some subgroup, subsection review of the map later on. We're going to get your individual input. We really want you to be thinking about what are you trying to cause, in which domain, and what's required to cause that at the highest level. Like what are the 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 things when you're thinking really clearly that if you could do all those, you're good. And then we're going to take that input, we'll tell you how later on, and we're going to use it to help us rebuild the map. Okay? So what's to come then is an inclusive and integrated map. And as Kenny said, and after that we kind of don't know. We're going to take just the first step, see how reality changes, and then respond. Thank you very much.